But the story continues. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" Understand here, that's not where they were supposed to be. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. It turns out that they did not kill him. One of the brothers, Reuben, persuaded the others that they should not murder Joseph, but just throw him into a pit and leave him there without water. I guess in their mind that wasn't quite as bad as killing him outright. But actually, Reuben had suggested this as a play for time. He was trying to put everything on hold so he could find a discreet moment to rescue Joseph and take him home. The pit was a stalling tactic. However, while most of the brothers were still lingering at the scene, some traders came by headed for Egypt. And Judah persuaded the brothers there with him that they should sell Joseph into slavery with these passing Midianites for 20 pieces of silver. A nifty solution to their various moral dilemmas. They got rid of the irritating punk brother without committing murder. They would concoct some kind of lie or excuse for Joseph's disappearance that would leave them blameless in their father's eyes, and they would make a few bucks too. It would break the old man's heart when they went home to tell him that Joseph had been killed by a wild beast or some such. But he'd get over it in time, however much time was left before Dad would die and leave them their inheritance. You know how that story goes. Frederick Buechner has written that if the brothers of Joseph were to face criminal charges for what they did to him, it would be hard to find a jury to convict them, because most people would easily understand why they hated Joseph. Not only did he have these grandiose dreams in which he was Mr. Big and everybody else was groveling at his feet, but Joseph was also the sort who always wanted to tell you about those dreams in sickening detail, whether you wanted to know it or not. He wanted to be sure that you knew how great he was. And Joseph was his father's pet. The elder of two sons Jacob had with his second and favorite wife, Rachel. Coming to his father later in life, Joseph, in his youth, was able to slide by without much responsibility or expectation, almost none at all when compared to the demands upon his older half-brothers. He mostly hung around the house in relative ease with the women there looking after him, telling him how cute he was. And he had things, right? An Xbox with all the latest games, fashionable clothes, and especially he had a beautiful coat. A gift from his father, made from expensive fabric with sleeves that he flaunted, while the older brothers were mostly in t-shirts and jeans, sweaty and dirty from work. Maybe Jacob just didn't have it to give when they were younger. But the older boys never got anything like what Joseph mostly took for granted: the attention, the emotional connection, the material advantages, and the symbol of it all, that coat. It shouldn't be hard to imagine the dynamic. I'll offer my own family experience as an example. My siblings were 10, 12, and 16 years old when I was born. From their perspective, it looked like my life as a child was very different and very much easier than theirs, and certainly it was. That was true. My oldest brother was born in 1940 at the end of the Great Depression, in the ramp-up to the next World War. I was born 16 years later, during the greatest expansion of wealth in human history, at a time when my parents had seen and dealt with just about everything concerning children, and had become a lot mellower than when they started out. After all they'd been through, my arrival was received as an occasion for joy and the promise of a new day. It was a shift that everyone could understand as historical and perfectly natural, my siblings too, though I remember them whining about me being spoiled. And there was a moment of disgust when my sister mock whispered to our elder brother, "We should have drowned him when we had the chance." As we think of Joseph, the great-grandson of Abraham and Sarah, the son of Israel, who became the agent of salvation for God's covenant people, it's important to remember that his brothers despised him, and to confess that we can easily imagine how that was so. He had gifts they didn't, or didn't feel like they had in their fair share. And Joseph was an absolute snot about showing off, insensitive, and it seems to me uncaring for the effect on his older brothers. Joseph doesn't become a sympathetic character for me until after he is brought low, after he is sold into slavery, after he finds himself in Egypt, a household servant, discovering the power of his gifts in working for the benefit and the hopes of others. He's not a sympathetic character until he comes to understand that the meaning of his dreams is more than the delusion of his grandeur. When there was famine at home in Israel, the brothers who had sold Joseph into slavery came to Egypt looking for food. And what they didn't know was that the brother they despised for his dreams and sold into slavery was now positioned by his dreams to save their lives and the life of their people. Through the power of his dreams, Joseph had risen to become the prime minister of Egypt, with political clout and granaries full of wheat at his disposal. Generations passed as Joseph and his brothers and their descendants, these uninvited Hebrew immigrants, became useful as low-wage workers who could be exploited as stateless foreigners. Many were held in a kind of economic enslavement, eventually to be targeted as undesirable aliens when they heard the voice of God calling them to freedom, and they dared to dream aloud of justice. Like Joseph before them, the later descendants of Israel in Egypt were despised for their dreams. Generations passed, but finally, when the time came for the people of Israel to beat feet out of Egypt, to follow the dream of freedom and call of justice, they literally dug up the bones of Joseph. They dug up his bones and carried them on their journey to the promised land. The The stories of Joseph, these stories of a dream redeemed, these are the bones of memory, the bones of tradition, the bones of success and failure, struggle, forgiveness, and deliverance, the history of God caring for us that is always with us. This story of Joseph, the dreamer so easily despised, is the story of Israel and its redemption. The story of our faith that we carry with us on our journey into God's promise. And I think the most powerful lesson we find in this saga is that Joseph's dreams of greatness for himself led to nothing good until they became a vision for others too. His dream of greatness for himself just led from one kind of slavery to the next, one prison to another, alienations and defeats, until his vision expanded to the needs of others. And he used his gift to interpret the signs of the time for more than just his own gain. Then he becomes really powerful. He rises to become Pharaoh's vizier, and by his vision saves both Egypt and Israel from starvation. The lesson of Joseph informing our faith is that dreams of greatness probably don't lead to anything good until they become a vision for others too. And a selfish dream is likely to break you before there's any chance that it will make you truly great, or great again. Real greatness is found in love for God and neighbor. It's measured by what we can create and give, not by what we consume and spend. And we dare not forget our own history of inspiration and giftedness, abuse and betrayal, renewal and forgiveness. As we move along into our call to freedom and promise, as we would envision and move into a future, we darn sure better dig up those bones and carry them with us, lest we ever forget. There comes a time in the story when the brothers have all met up again in Egypt, and they have all recognized each other as family. They have all faced up to the history of wrongs and redemptions that bind them together. And then Jacob, their father, dies. The one whose love for them all was guarantee for their peacemaking died. And the brothers began to wonder if the reconciliation would hold. Generous and forgiving as Joseph had been, his brothers couldn't avoid the nasty suspicion that once the old man wasn't around anymore to put in a good word for them, Joseph, quite powerful Joseph, might start thinking again about what it had felt like when they tossed him into that pit and decide to pay them back for it as they deserved. So they went to see him, fell down on their knees and begged his pardon. And Joseph, his answer rings out like a bell. Mark it well. Don't be scared. Of course you are pardoned, he said. Do you think I'm God to grovel before me like that? In the old days, of course, God was just who he'd rather suspected he was. And the dreams of others groveling before him had been his favorite. This is the story of of how Israel was saved from famine and extinction. It is the story of how Joseph was saved as a human being, saved from himself. It is the story of how our dreams are redeemed in the trust that God is love. God made us in love, and God made us for loving. And that even when we are at the end of our wits, we are never beyond the reach of that love. We darn sure better dig up those bones and carry them with us in our call to the future, lest we ever forget. May your giving this day and always be in that spirit.